I will be the Scholastic Literacy consultant who will be supporting you, your needs today. So I will be delivering your content. So I'm excited to introduce to you today your Scholastic Literacy Digital Suite. And so I am going to talk through three of the products that you are going to have access to. You do not have access to them today, so I am just giving you a high-level overview. You will not in any way be an expert on any of these products today, but we do hope that at least by the time we are done with this session, that you know the purpose of each program and the data that you can get from it, because we feel like that's pretty important. So I'm going to go in order as you see on the screen. We have first, which is our foundational literacy program. Then we will talk through Literacy Pro, which is our independent reading software. And then finally, we will close it out with W.O.R.D, which is how we support vocabulary instruction. So without further ado, I will jump in, beginning with our first program first. So as I stated earlier, this deals with our foundational grade levels. However, some of you all may teach grades that extend outside of second grade, and that's perfectly appropriate to have students who still need some of that foundational support enrolled in first. However, most of you all will benefit from this as you are K through 2 teachers. So essentially, first is an adaptive game-based program. Each student is tasked with finding missing books and helping the island elves learn how to read. So this takes place on Ooka Island. Throughout the reading adventure, there are 5 foundational reading skills introduced through 24 levels of the software. It takes about 80 hours to complete the program, so your students will be able to log in year after year, and you don't have to worry about them running out of content. All of the first activities were designed with young learners in mind, and so they are built on a series of learning outcomes, but they feel like fun. I will tell you all, specifically the kindergarten teachers, that this program works really well even with your youngest learners. I have had my son on it, who is 5 and going to kindergarten this year, on the program since he was 3. And once I showed him how to like click or like navigate the programs, maybe within a session or 2, he was able to fly on his own. So just to put your mind at ease, because I know that's usually one of the worries that we have as kindergarten teachers. So the learning flow cycle for first addresses all 5 foundational reading skills. And so it happens within this 3-cycle process of learning. And so in the first cycle, your students are going to spend 20 minutes in guided phonological activities. And so they'll work on developing phonemic awareness and phonological skills, which will address all 44 phonemes in the English language, but in a systematic and supportive process. And I'm going to talk about some of those supports. The second step, there we go, in the process is reading for comprehension. We are huge proponents and supporters of supporting any reading instruction with ensuring that comprehension is there, right? Because the ultimate goal is for students to understand what they read. And so in that second step, students will read along with the characters in the program, Zobot, the robot, and Auntie K, and it will take them from being non-readers to the beginning of second grade. And they'll work through about 85 books, specially designed to support the first program. And then within that final step, students have an opportunity to engage in 8 minutes of free choice activities. And so here they're able to go back and interact with any of the games that they've previously played. They can spend time customizing their avatar and playing in the playground. So that's some free time, and that's one of the ways that they are rewarded. So I'm going to talk quickly through how your students experience first. When they log in, they're going to be introduced to Zobot and Auntie K, and then they will be directed through 10 different activities that they will engage in throughout. All of them are not accessible at every stage, so they're baby steps into it. Again, here's the learning flow cycle. And that first step is for students to spend that 20 minutes with guided phonemic awareness and phonological activities. The goal of first is automatic, effortless reading. We want students to be able to decode words. So that's the primary goal there. The learning to read process is organized into small, chunky steps. And these processes are spread across 24 levels. So as the students complete each phase, they are rewarded and recognized for their work. And they can do that. They receive mitts to spend in the playground and decorate their avatars. But you can also reward them by sending over awards directly through the program as well. First begins with an essential pre-reading skill, which is alphabet recognition. Students have been at home for a while. More than likely, the students who are coming to you from kindergarten may not have had any pre-K experience. So we don't know if they know their alphabet at all. The great thing is that their letters are going to be introduced through first, and they're introduced in groups of 3 to 5. So students are introduced to the lowercase levels for letters first, since those are the ones that appear most frequently in text. And then as the alphabet is being mastered, the sounds associated with these letters are introduced in other activities. The focus is on building an explicit connection between the sounds of oral language and their written forms. And so first purposefully connects phonemic awareness to phonics instruction. And it does so by starting students out with the sounds that are easiest to hear and blend first. So those sounds like ooh. So those ones that are easy to hear will start the first sequence. And each of those sounds will be lengthened so that your students can get a good grasp of the sound before having to blend it with another sound. And it takes them through the blending process as well. It also notices whether or not students are able to complete a task. And so we know that one exposure is never enough for students to demonstrate mastery with a thing, right? So first is designed for students to have multiple opportunities to engage with each activity. And so to ensure mastery, students complete these activities in a level 3 times before they're moved on to the next level. And so if a student's performance indicates that they need more time, then first is going to automatically adapt so that the student can have more practice with that. But it also adapts when it notices that students are already demonstrating proficiency with the thing so that students don't get bored. So as I stated, there are the 5 foundational skills of reading that are addressed with first. I want you to take a look at these very important skills and think about what you've had to focus on primarily with your students, and what do you find to be the hardest for your students to grasp based on your demographic? What do you find to be the hardest for students to grasp? Comprehension, vocabulary, comprehension, recurring theme here. Fluency, vocab, and comprehension, right? Reading to learn, nice. Even some phonics in there, yep. So I'm glad that you all are talking about this comprehension piece, because even though this is focusing on that foundational aspect of reading with the phonemes and the phonological skills, there is still built into the program opportunities for students to develop that comprehension. We know reading is no good if you can just call out words but not understand what you're reading. And so your students are going to love the eBooks. They are designed around a gradual release model. So in the early levels, there are 2 narrators, and that's W.O.R.D and Auntie K right there. And they're going to read aloud to your students while your students follow along with the highlighted text. One narrator is going to serve as a metacognitive reading coach. So she'll be asking those questions, supporting students and showing their thinking, similar to how you would with your read alouds. But as you can see, they transition into then reading with W.O.R.D and then eventually reading by themselves, right? So the scaffolding eventually or gradually fades out. As your students are engaged in first, they're going to interact with automatic embedded assessments And there are 3 levels of adaptability built into FIRST. And so that first level of adaptability is the immediate scaffolding that you see on the screen. So if a student is taking longer than a couple of seconds to answer a question, then the software will provide immediate support so that the student doesn't get frustrated. That second level of adaptability is activity redirect. So as students are engaging in activities, if the content was not mastered, then the software creates a new path for the student with the same content. So this reinforces that skill development in real time and prevents students from continuing to struggle or being moved ahead without the solid foundation being established. And then finally, there is a reading redirect. And that adjusts the instructional path of FIRST based on students' performance within the software as well. And so the program is able to make predictions based on the data trends within the sets of 5 books. So if it sees that a student is progressing nicely, rather than having the students continue to go through content that they would likely master, it would automatically jump them ahead. But the software knows how to move them back if they are showing struggles. So it's going to adjust to the student and make sure that students are right where they need to be. So that's how it looks from the student standpoint. And I want to say, as I'm going through this relatively quickly, and that's because you don't have access to the products right now, but your district will send you a link to the full out webinars if you want to view those in more details. And you also have access to other resources, but the program is relatively easy to navigate. So now that we've looked at it from the eyes of your students, let's look at how you will experience FIRST. I don't know about you, but I always care about what kind of data I'm going to get from anything that I'm using. How's it going to help me in my daily instruction? And so when you first log into FIRST, you're going to automatically be taken to the class overview data. Now, the first report under that tab is your overview data. So it's going to give you progress information about your class as a whole. But if you notice on that left side, that's where your students are. And so if you want to see individual student data, you will simply click on the name that you're trying to view data for. But let's talk through the overview data first. So as you log in, you're going to be able to see the average scores for the activities. You're going to see the specific average scores for the instructional components from the learning flow cycle, which are the phonological activities and the reading for comprehension. And so that's what these 2 scores are. I always recommend starting with that phonological report and that comprehension report, because I feel like that's where you get the most detailed information about each of your students. On that same page, as you scroll down, you are then taken to a graph that shows you the average results from your foundational skills, and they're broken down by specific phonological skills. And that makes it easy for you to see how your class is navigating the program as a whole. So if you know that something is coming up that you're going to instruct on, it may be useful to see how your class is already doing with that thing. Again, this is the overview for your class. And then as you continue to scroll down on that same page, that final section breaks down the reading comprehension results into specific reading skills, just like the phonological awareness activities report does. And the great thing about this is that it differentiates between how students do when it is just a text, when there's read aloud support, and so it lets you see if students are better with text with pictures. So it's really pretty detailed. Now, I said, from the beginning that as you access these reports, on the left side, you'll see your students' names. So if you want to see specific data about students, and you will, of course, then you can click on a student's name and be taken to their specific data. So here's an example of one student's phonological progress report. As you can see, you can drill down and review the results for these individuals. You can turn these knobs on or off to look at the specific data as you want to see it. So if you know that students are just starting the program and they're in kindergarten, you may turn that off because they probably won't be at the level to even see data or good data for blending anyway. But you can also have all of those on and see the lines as they present there. That along the bottom, you will see which level they're on. What's great about this report is that as you tap on each of these individual circles, you are able to see how a student performed in that area of phonics, but depending on the level. So you're able to see whether things are inclining, whether the data is inconsistent. And so all of that will help you to make instructional decisions for your students. Another of my favorites is the proficiency report. And so when you look at the proficiency report, you're able to see your class's level of proficiency as it relates to the comprehension skills, but also the phonological skills all in one place. And so you can look at specifics, you can turn any of these columns off and on, but the key thing to note here is that it is color coded. And so they are broken down into 3 proficiency bands. That dark blue represents students who are in the learning phase. The lighter or middle blue represents students who are practicing. And then that bright blue means that students are proficient within that skill, or at least demonstrated proficiency in the program, let me say. And we define proficiency as 70% on that skill. So again, you can see that at a glance. Create groups or whatever you need from there. And so earlier I was sharing with you that the software has that built-in ability to see where students are likely going to demonstrate mastery of something, and it just skips them ahead. So what you see here is an example of that. When you see that dotted line like that, it means that this student went from here to here. And if needed, then the student could easily be taken back where it needs to be, but it's going to continually adjust until it gets students in that just right place. Another great resource that you have access to is the resources tab. And it is right there on your screen. You simply click on it and you will be taken to a page that will give you phonics decodables, depending on the level of your students, other activities that you can use for phonics instruction, parent letters, all types of resources. So we just talked through first. Any questions? Don't see any in the chat. Either that means I was super thorough or you are still processing, and that is okay. Or it's after lunch, and I know how that goes too. But even as we move on, if you end up having, can students be shared among teachers? Will this, okay, good questions. All right, so if you log in through Clever, then yes, you can access this through Clever. So it depends on what your single sign-on option is. And I'm gonna talk more about how you will get into that a little bit later. Will special ed teachers have access to this data? It depends on how your students are rostered. So I've seen cases where if students are rostered under the special ed teacher for reading, then they're assigned, they have access to it. So that is going to be kind of like a scheduling question, and you will be able to see more of that once your students get into the program. But that differs based on the district. Perfect. Yep, she's already answered that question. All right. So I'm going to transition. As you, again, continue to think about your questions, populate them. I'm going to pause between every program to give you an opportunity to ask questions. But I'm also going to build in some time at the end just in case something comes up. And then, of course, we're not leaving you. So you will have access to us even after this training once you get in. Because sometimes you don't even know the questions that you have until you start playing around. And we know that. So let's talk about Literacy Pro. You're going to be able to see my enthusiasm as I talk through this program, because I simply love Literacy Pro for what it does for allowing access to text for students. Some of you all may have students who don't like to read for a number of reasons, and some of you may wonder how you're going to get your independent reading in with the number of books, or even in COVID times and having to be particular about how students share text. So Literacy Pro is going to really support your independent reading. And what happens is it is set up to build a personalized bookshelf for your students. So not only are they receiving access to text, but they're receiving access to text that they can read independently. I want you to take a look at the number that you see on the screen. And I want to point out that this number represents the difference in words that students will encounter if they read daily for a year compared to when they don't. So students who read daily will have access to more than 4 million words compared to students who don't read. So I'm saying this to say, not only, we already know how important it is to read, but exposure to reading and voluminous reading is what makes good readers. We also know that this research is directly connected to standardized test scores. So the more students read, the better they're going to be at reading. So let's talk about Literacy Pro and how your students are going to experience it. This program is designed to be flexible, so you can use it however you see fit. You may roll this into your independent reading station. You may build in time at the end of your reading block for independent reading where everybody logs on if you're one-to-one, which I think most people are after the last 18 months. You can have students use this at home. So you decide how your students are going to access Literacy Pro. But what Literacy Pro can do for students is help them find that just right book based on their reading level, their interest, genre, and other filters. Many of you, I'm sure, have had to contend with students trying to read text that they weren't always able to read or could access. And so Literacy Pro is going to support that. It also supports them in setting and tracking personalized reading goals, so they're able to set their own goals, and logging what they've read each day or each week. So I was one of those teachers who likes to have my students read every day. Literacy Pro is going to help you keep up with whether or not that's happening. But in addition to that, it can also help to identify a student's reading level based on Lexile, and then it can assess how well students are understanding what they're reading because there are built-in comprehension checks. And then finally, once students are done reading, they are able to leave a starred review. So we know how important it is to let students reflect on their experience after reading a text. And so you are able to go in and see how students enjoyed what they've read. So I want you to type into the chat which one of these 5 you are most likely going to use or most excited about using Literacy Pro for. The data from first will not be synced with Literacy Pro. Tiffany, good question. 1s and 4s, just right books, assessing reading levels and comprehensions. Yep. 1 and 4s are always the heavy hitters. Yeah, perfect. And again, you're going to have access to all of it. So there you go. So when students get logged in, they're going to complete a reading survey. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to select their avatar, and then they will be led through a bank of 23 options so that they can select their reading interest. And so they're going to be asked questions like, do you like to read? How often do you read? Those kinds of things, just so that it's able to see where your students are currently. From there, a series of book covers from various genres are going to be shown to each of your students, and they're just going to decide whether or not the cover looks interesting. So is this something I might pick up if I were in the library? Yes or no? And so that data is being used to curate your students' personalized reading recommendations. So just like when you log onto Netflix and you've already started watching movies and Netflix begins to recognize what your interests are and suggest other movies for you, Literacy Pro works in the same way. And so once that survey is complete, Literacy is going to use that information to create those recommendations for students. And so that is what the screen will look like, after they have completed it. From there, students are then guided to create their own personal reading goals. And so they will be asked how many days per week they plan to read and how many minutes per day. I always recommend to teachers that if you have a classroom recommendation, that you guide this process. So maybe this is done in the first couple of weeks when you're setting up and going through procedures. So if you know that you want your students to read for 15 minutes every night, then when they go in to set up their goals, I would have them at least set that. And then that way you are able to see whether or not they're meeting the goals that are set for you without any additional paperwork. You can literally just log into Literacy Pro and see. It also is going to prompt them every time they log in. So in the student dashboard, there will always be, when they log in, 3 recommended Literacy Pro ebooks based on their reading interest and their grade level. And if you put in their Lexile level, it will recommend books at their independent reading level. So it can be based on Lexiles or guided reading levels. And you can also set it up to assess students to get that level if you don't already have a means of doing that. So either way, but it's going to make sure that they fall within their independent reading level. And so those are the ones that you see down there. Ebooks in the collections are primarily noted by an orange tab at the bottom of each book that says read it now. And that's that little tab right there. So that way we know if there's a book that they see that is directly able to be read right there, then they can just click read it now if they want. The wonderful thing about Literacy Pro is that it is going to keep track of where students leave off in text. So if you are using this as an independent reading station and you are letting your students know that it is time to wrap up independent reading, when they close out Literacy Pro, there's going to be a bookmark in that book so that when they log back in, they do not have to spend time finding their place. They will be able to jump right back in where they left off. If they decide that they like a book, then they're going to click that plus sign next to the book. So let's say that they see these 3 recommended, they want to know more about it, and they click on the tile for that book. They'll see a summary of it. They'll get to see it up close. They may want to kind of flip through it and see if they like it. And then they can add it to their bookshelf. And then they will have a, again, personalized bookshelf. So once they've started creating that bookshelf, it's time for them to begin to read. And so as students engage with the ebook, there are a lot of supportive features that are already built in, but it handles very much like a regular, like a tablet or some experience. And so students are able to navigate through the book by selecting these green tabs or the circles at the bottom. And also, I want to point out that they can use a tablet for this. They can use a Chromebook for this. They can even use a phone. So any device that connects to the internet, they can use for Literacy Pro in person. I want to point that out. So you don't have to worry about some of those younger students who have iPads because they just need to physically be able to touch things. That'll work too. Oh, also, I'm sorry. There is a read to me feature. So again, many of you all are, well, you all are lower grade teacher, but some of you all are kindergarten teachers, right? And so some of your students are going to need their text read to them, at least starting out. If there's a text that has that read to me feature, it will be located up there and students will just click it and the book will be read to them and the words will be highlighted as they're being read, okay? So that you don't have to worry about that. If you have students who are navigating with chapter books, and let's say you wanted them to search for a particular book, read that book, but only focus on a particular chapter, then they could navigate through the chapters by selecting this icon over here, and the chapters will pop up within the program. They can select the chapter and pick up right there. My favorite part about Literacy Pro is the fact that for many of the interactions with ebooks, it is you don't have the option to have students annotate. And annotating goes a long way when we're trying to get students to process text, right? We know it directly supports comprehension, and it is one of the ways that we ensure there's some level of accountability when students are reading, because that's a lot of the reason why we don't send students to read independently. When I send you to read independently, I want to know that you're actually reading and not just flipping pages and feigning that, right? So you have within the program some highlighters and sticky notes. And so what you can do is have your students, let's say select the highlighter, and let's say that you're working in whole class on identifying main ideas and key details. You may have your students select the main idea in pink and then have them highlight the supporting details in yellow. Or if you're working on vocabulary or seeing words in text, some of your high frequency words, you may have them notice those words and highlight them. So just think about all of the ways that your students will be able to use those highlighter features, and they're going to stay there in the text. So when your students go back into the text, it'll still be there, and you are able to conference with them around that tool. In addition to that, one of my favorite things to do within guided reading and any time I have students working with books is to have them use sticky notes. And a lot of times, even when I'm modeling lessons with kindergarten teachers, I'm doing that even with the youngest babies. They may not be able to write a whole lot, but they can put a question mark or an exclamation mark on the sticky note to say, I had a question about this page, or this is something that I learned that was new. And so they can simply type whatever information that they want to within that sticky note, and it will stay on that page. So when you call Kim up to conference with her, you're able to say, hey, why don't you show me some of the places that you found to be interesting? Number one, this is going to let students know that you are actually monitoring what you're expecting them to do. And then it's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to do the things that you're asking them to do. So you have that. Students can easily go back and find those sticky notes within the text right there on the page. Students are also able to view their own data. We know how important it is that students understand what is happening as well, right? A lot of times students are just working through things and they don't have any idea what the data says about them. They are able to see how they are progressing towards their reading goals. They're able to see the total number of books that they've actually finished reading, the total number of minutes read, which are automatically counted in Literacy Pro. So as students are reading, it's automatically saying, tabulating those minutes for them. And so it's helpful for them to be able to see it because it serves as a motivator for them to continue to read. Students are also able to add books that are not within the program. So like I said, if it's a text that is already in there and it has that ebook feature, which a lot of the texts have, but there are also books within the program that are not ebooks, that are common children's books. And so students are able to select a text and select add minutes from that screen. And they're able to select that text and add the minutes that they spent reading. So let's say they read a book that was in their own library at home, or they found a book in the school library, in your classroom library. They can also log their minutes from reading there too. So they're now logging the minutes that are automatically calculated with ebooks, but then also the ones that are not. Oh, let me go back, because I also want to point out that from that screen, it's also really important that students select when they have finished reading the book, because that is what will add to that number of total books read, but then also is what enables that feature for them to be able to provide feedback on the book. So they'll be able to leave a starred rating, and then also type in their feedback, and you can actually go in and read how they rated the book. Other students cannot, so you don't have to worry about it if they're them typing something and if it's inappropriate or something like that, other students have an access to it. Of course, many of you stated in the chat that one of the main struggles that we see with readers across just everywhere is that comprehension piece, right? So we want students to be able to decode words, but more importantly, we want them to understand what they're actually decoding. And so Literacy Pro also includes optional multiple choice reading assessment. So you may have your students take them. You may say, I don't want you worrying about that right now. Right now, I just want you to get familiar with the program. Either way, these are called Think Mores, and they are available within the program. They pop up directly in the ebook, so students are able to refer back to the text to help them answer questions. So they're not just telling you, oh, I know the answer to this because my mom has a cat. Not that your students do that, but my students did. Just make up stuff. Like, okay, that is nice, but let's go back to see what the text says. So this actually encourages that. So now I want to show you your own dashboard. The great thing about your dashboard is that what happens on the student side, you're able to see. So when you log in, those tabs that are on the left side are going to allow you to explore the features from the educator dashboard more deeply. So what automatically is going to pop up is your overview data. You're going to see in that top right corner that you're viewing data for your whole class. It's going to have the total minutes spent, the average score on the Think More, the total books read. And so think about how you could use that as a motivator in your classroom. You may have something that says when we get to this amount of minutes read, or when we get to this amount of books, we're going to have whatever you allow in your district. Our school was sugar free, so we had to get really creative. But there are many ways to motivate students. And there are actually certificates built in if you want it just for that to be a certificate that you printed out. But you can also see that you have access to other data. So you can drill down by student and their usage. You're able to add books to your own collection, which will support you as you navigate small group discussions. Hopefully you won't have to do this virtually, because we are going to claim that schools are going to remain fully open and we will be able to use actual text. But know that should you have to go virtual for any reason, you still have access to the full collection of ebooks as well. We like that because many of you all, I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure, with K through 2 teachers, but we know the importance of students engaging with rich text on their own, but also seeing their teachers model how to read fluently. And so we recommend that you also use Literacy Pro for your whole class instruction. So of course, you're going to have those texts that come with Scholastic Literacy, but there will be other times where you want to read aloud to your students. You may need to model a read aloud, or use a portion of a text to teach a specific mini lesson, or model how to think through a text or ask questions of a text. You can pull up a text and display it right there in the classroom, and it's big enough for your students to actually view. So you can use this as well. And of course, as I stated earlier, we always go back to data. How is this going to help me with my students? What can I use it for? Somebody spoke about RTI earlier. So you're also able to use this data to speak specifically about some of those goals that you have for students. Within the students and reports section on your dashboard, you have access to a number of different reports. And many of the reports here are like the ones in first and the next program that we're going to view. So they're really easy to navigate and view the specifics of. But on that student and reports tab, you're going to automatically see an overview of your class data. And then as you click across, you will see usage data. You will see data on your students' progress throughout their reading levels, and so on. When you want to look at specific usage reports, you are able to drill down by the student, and you are able to see how students are spending their time in Literacy Pro. Favorite feature about this is that I can distinguish between whether students are actually spending time reading when they're in Literacy Pro, or if they're spending time searching for books. So if my goal is that you are spending 15 to 20 minutes in Literacy Pro, then I should be able to see that you're spending the majority of that time reading. And when not, I'm able to say, hey, Scarlett, I noticed that while you're in Literacy Pro and you're using it 20 minutes a day, most of the time you're spending 10 minutes reading and the other 10 minutes doing something else. I want you to make sure that you're actually spending at least 15 minutes reading. And then they're like, oh, how does she know? And they already think we're magical, mystical beings. And so this is just further going to support that thinking. You're also able to, again, see those reading levels. So you're able to see where students start at the beginning of the year, where students are in the middle of the year, and where they are at the end of the year. So if you want to enable the Scholastic reading measure for your students, then it will automatically level them for you, and it will re-administer that assessment beginning, middle, and end. I do know that because you have Scholastic Literacy, you may be using NSGRA or some other way of assessing levels, so you don't have to do this. You could simply just go in and put the levels in whatever way is going to be the most streamlined for you. But this can definitely take care of that as well for you. And then in the Think More tab, going back to that comprehension piece, you are able to see how students are doing on those Think More. So after they take those assessments, you're able to see how many times students took them, their scores for each of the books that they took a Think More for. You're able to see the answers that they chose compared to the correct answers. And then if you dig even deeper, you're able to see how students are averaging doing on specific skills over time. So these same skills are assessed over and over. You're able to see consistently how they're performing, and you're able to use that data however you want to. You may know that you have cause and effects coming up. If I go to look at my class data and I see that the majority of my students are doing okay, but I do have this 4 or 5 students who are still not doing so well with it, I know before I even teach cause and effect that I'm going to have some students who may struggle with that. And I can use that data as somewhat of a pre-assessment. So again, just more data for you without you having to do an extra thing, which we all like because there's never enough time in the world. So what are your questions? Yes, Lynn, I agree. So you're going to do NSGRA and you're going to get those levels anyway. You can totally enable this. And the first time that students log in, it'll take you through the assessment. But there's also another assessment built in that will make sure that students are even able to navigate Literacy Pro on their own. So it just makes sure it's developmentally appropriate. So for some of your kindergartners, kindergartners are not created equal, just like any other group of students. And so some of them may need a little more support. And it's going to tell you that before you're spending half of a semester and you go in and check your data and then you're like, oh man, the kid wasn't even able to get in. So yep, lots of that. All right, last program. You still with me? Let me see. A couple of y'all smiling. It's always a good sign. All right, the last program is W.O.R.D. W.O.R.D. I like because it is the sleeper of the programs. Most of the time, we do not focus our efforts on vocabulary. We focus on sight words, we focus on phonics, but vocabulary is super important when we start to think about how we're going to move student levels, because that's how lexicals are determined, the occurrence of rare words. And so we know that if we beef up our students' vocabulary, we are likely going to move their levels, and it's going to support that comprehension. W.O.R.D. was developed by Dr. Freddie Hebert. It's based on her research around fluency, vocabulary, and word knowledge. And so in her research, she found that she did an analysis of over like 10,000 texts that are read between grades K and 12. And what she found was that there are 2,500 morphological word families that make up 90% of the text that students are going to encounter. Never heard that word before in my life prior to talking about this program. However, the simplified way to look at that is when you think about a word, how many ways students will be exposed to that simple word, like a word like think, for example. Think about it, or analyze. So it covers all of the ways that a student could potentially see this word. And so that's going to further support their understanding of the word. And it's a very complex and intricate process that we don't have to know. You know why? Because the program is going to figure it out for us. Some key things to note is that W.O.R.D. focuses on those 2,500 word families that make up 90% of the text that your students are going to encounter. It also focuses on the fact that research supports that students learn best when words are taught in context. So a lot of times we're teaching vocabulary words, but if they're done outside of context, students are learning them for the moment, but they never really stick with students. You're really kind of filing them in our short-term memory. And then we also know that repeat exposure to words and teaching of multiple meanings is what cements words. And so students don't really understand words until they're able to apply them flexibly. And so Word supports students in doing all of those things. But it does it in a way that is so fun. So again, this is a program that I use with my 5-year-old, and he loves it. Here are the learning objectives for Word. As you can see, the same things are covered throughout grades K through 5. The difference is that it happens at a level that is developmentally appropriate. So it's not introduced in the same way for every grade. So for example, here are some of the learning objectives. You can see that there are some overlaps, right? You'll note that in kindergarten, the main thing we focus on are those inflected endings, when students don't just kind of drop them and don't read them. So now supporting them and understanding what that means. But then transitioning into first grade, where there's some that we start to focus on tenses. We start to look at those inflected endings still, but then also adding in comparisons. And so the program gets more and more complex, so students can engage with the program year after year and not be exposed to the same content. When students experience the program, which they again can do from any device that has internet connectivity, they will be taken to this page, which is their landing page, and they will select play. This is the themes screen. Word is built across 10 themes that span grades K through 5. So all of your students, K through 5, will be working through the same themes. And so this is great if you have students if you have a mixed classroom where you have K and 1, or like some of the special ed demographics may have, right? You have multiple populations of students, they can potentially be working within the same theme at the same time. It also keeps track of the words that they're learning and the words that they've demonstrated that they know. And so that's just a cool way for students to keep up with how many words they've read along the way. There is a flow to the software where students are first taken through a placement test, which lets Word see what students already know. And then based on that, they are placed on a track. So it's going to place them either on the grade level track, but if they demonstrate that they're struggling with that a bit, there's a lower track that provides the same content, but differentiated at a level that students can access. And then that determines the rest of their progress throughout with the passage and so on. Here's an example of how those themes look across grade levels. So this is a science and technology theme, but as you can see, again, developmentally appropriate. So for kids in K, it looks like they're just talking about science and technology as it relates to day and night. But as we progress, you see wild weather in 2nd grade, forces in 4th grade, power in 5th grade. So again, they're never engaging with the same information. Students are going to be given that placement between at the beginning of every new theme. So it will not assume that just because it was placed on this track for the first theme, that it should be placed on this track for the next one. And that's how we keep the instruction dynamic and adaptable so that we're meeting students where they are. Again, it results in a dual track system, which you are able to see from your dashboard. So you're able to see that Dawn was on this track while Demetrius was on this track. She looked like, what? I told you I like to call people by name. All right. So here's an example of what that will look like. This is a placement test, a sample. So it really just asks them a question about the word in context, and students have to apply what they know. If they don't know, not a big deal. That's why we need to know that, so it determines the track for them. Before you ask, there is read aloud support for kindergarten and 1, because I know that's always the question. Yep, there is read aloud support, so you do not have to worry about that. And you can actually still add read aloud support for your other students, but it's automatic for your K and 1 students. So this is an example of what those science and technology texts might look like. So here's that kindergarten one, day and night, and then here's one for an upper grade student. The great thing, let me point out, the great thing about the passages is that these words are shown to students no matter what track they're on. They're going to experience the same passages, but simplified track will just have like simpler sentences, whereas the grade level track will have more complex and grade level appropriate sentences. Content is the exact same, so you don't have to worry about the student sitting next to the other student who is getting something that worried about whether or not they're getting the same thing. They're all going to get it. They will have a reading, fiction and a nonfiction passage. They get to choose which one that they want to go through first, but they will still have to go through the other. So you don't have to worry about them consistently choosing the fiction or nonfiction. They will have experience with both. And again, there is full read aloud support for K and 1. The read aloud highlights the text as students go through it, so they're able to follow along in that one-to-one correspondence. And then there's an embedded dictionary. So if there's a word that is said that students don't understand, they're able to touch that word within the program and learn more about that word. So even if it's a word that's not part of their theme, they can still interact with the other words in the program. So the data and reporting from your side, again, looks very similar to the other programs, super user-friendly. You're going to always have that overview report. You're going to always have that time spent report. You're going to always be able to see how they're making progress towards the themes and the learning objectives. So once you log in, you're going to see, in a similar fashion to first, your classroom overview data. On that left side is that panel where each of your individual students are located. So whenever you want to drill down, you just select that student's name. Otherwise, you're looking at your overall classroom data. At the top, you're going to see the overall stats for usage, Word, and how frequently they're getting onto the program. So days and minutes. And the reason for that is because we do have usage recommendations. And I'm going to share those in 5 seconds. But as you scroll down on the page, you're also able to see how students are progressing, whether they're learning, practicing, or proficient within those learning objectives that we saw. So again, you can use this to support your whole class with small group instruction. You can select a student's name to see their individual data. You're also able to view the classroom time spent report, which means you're able to see how students are using the program and when. So if they're using the program in school, you're going to know that. If they're using the program after 4, it's going to log it as after hours usage. That's going to help you if you're assigning Word as, let's say, homework, okay? You're also able to see how they're progressing as it relates to the themes that they are going to encounter. You'll be able to see where they are within the theme. You're going to see whether they're on the simplified track or the grade level track. So you can keep up with that, and you can use that data in your conferences. You're also able to see whether they're learning, practicing, or proficient with those vocabulary activities, as well as the words that they are going to encounter. You're going to want to know this because you're going to be able to support them, their learning in your whole class instruction. So as these words come up, you're able to say, hey, I know in Word, some of you all have seen the word such and such. Once again, how does she know? Because we know all. We are all seeing and all knowing. Not really, but you know, that's what they think. And then my favorite feature is that you're able to see that stuff at a glance. I love color coding. I'm able to see across a row whether you're mostly proficient, mostly practicing. I'm able to group you based on these skills and where you are within the on the spectrum. Okay. So that was a lot, I know. Any questions? Okay. Yes, you're going to get more training about the specific details here. I do want to show you quickly how to access it before I let you go. even though you're not accessing it now. But just so you know, and I know Dr. Foster is going to follow up as well. You all, since you are using the single sign-on option, we're going to just ignore these slides, but know that you have, if you're using Clever, you'll go through there, or you will go through your launch pad, and then there will be a button that will be accessible to you, so you don't have to worry about going to digital.scholastic.com. You're going to click your sign-in option. Like I said, this won't matter to you. You're going to go through your single sign-on. But once you get in, you are going to be taken to a page that looks like this. You will see the tiles for each of your programs, but you will not see them until you receive an access code. And so those access codes will also be given to you by your district. Once you input your access code, your programs will be there. You'll go through your single sign-on and just click launch. It is so easy to navigate. If you're like me, you learn best by doing, not by sitting here listening to someone talk to you. But some people need both. So we know that some questions are going to come up. And what we're going to do is make sure that you have our contact info. You're going to also have access to webinars for the specific products if you want to know how to navigate them more deeply, but you want to do that on your own time. Want to share these usage recommendations before we hop off. We recommend that you use each of the programs. So that's why you'll have to think about how you're going to prioritize them. Between 15 to 20 minutes, at least three times a week. I will say that typically first is prioritized for grade K, and we recommend that, but it doesn't mean that your kindergarten students can't use Word or Literacy Pro. I would just think about how you're going to use it. So you may have them using it in their independent learning, independent reading center for Literacy Pro. If you want them to have a vocabulary center, then there's also a digital option there. Or you may say, I want you to use Word at home. So just think about how you're going to meet those usage requirements so that your students are getting the maximum impact and you're getting the most data that you can get. We want to see students complete level 6 by the end of the year in first. That's what we want them working towards. And then in Word, unit 3.